My subject is, must I obey? Must I obey? You know, there's a lot of debate about the Old Testament and the New Testament, and do I have to obey the law of God? Do I have to submit to His will? Well, yes, the Ten Commandments, and there's a lot of controversy about the Ten Commandments. A lot of people say we're no longer under the law. What do you mean you're no longer under the law? Do you realize that God gave us the law 3 different times? And so it must have been significant. I want to tell you a story when you come to thinking, must I obey? Must I obey? It's imperative because He is your Savior, your keeper. There was a young boy, very young boy, and the place where he was living, the house, caught on fire. And he was surrounded, the flames were all around him, in front of him, and he was separated from his mother, and he was in a room, and he couldn't get out because the flames were leaping all across the door and all down the hall, and he was trapped in this room. And he was screaming and hollering and begging for somebody to come and help him. And he was wondering, what could he do? How could he get away? How could he escape? And he screamed and screamed for help, but the help never came. And as the flames reached out and caught him and began to leap up on his clothes, and he beat at them with his little hands, screaming as loud as he could. And the smoke was choking him and seemingly tearing at his throat. And he's wondering, what shall I do? What shall I do? There was only 2 ways of escape. Either go through the flames or jump out the window that was in back of him. But that window was 3 stories up. And to a little kid, that was a long ways down. And he was terrified, and he was screaming and wondering what he was going to do, and just knowing that any minute he was going to be burned alive. He was about to die. He was at the point of death. The window was 3 stories down. He could not jump out that. He didn't have the nerve to jump out that window. He didn't have the nerve to go through the fire. What could he do? There was no way of escape. His little hands feebly beat at the flames that were coming upon him. And suddenly, strong arms reached out and grabbed him and smothered the flames of his clothes. And he was so thankful. He was saved, delivered from the fiery flame. Those strong arms carried him to the window and helped him down to the ladder, and he escaped. He was saved from the fiery death. Years later, the boy became a man. And over the years, he constantly relived that experience, and he often wondered, what happened to the man that had saved him? What happened to his Savior? He wanted in some way to repay the Savior that had saved him from a fiery death. And so years later, he became a young man, and he turned to the habit of drugs. And in order to support that habit, he had to rob, he had to steal, he had to molest people. And so he had just turned into a life of utter crime, disobeying all of God's laws, just breaking every law, just doing everything to support that habit. One evening, he saw an old man walking down the street, and he said, aha, this is an easy target. I can get some money out of him. This is an easy target. So he looked and he hid in an alleyway and waited for the old man to come walking by. And the old man came up shuffling up, and he got to the alleyway, and he grabbed that old man, started wrestling with him and tearing at his clothes and fighting him and hitting him and beating him, and the old man was crying, "Help, help, help." No help came. And the old man tried to struggle, but he was weak, he was feeble, he was unable to protect himself. And suddenly, the old man felt like, well, I'm going to die. This is my last hope. And he cried out, "Stop, stop. You must obey me, stop." And the young man said, "Why should I stop? Why should I obey you, old man? I need your money. Why should I obey you?" And the old man said, "Stop, you don't want to. You don't want to do this terrible thing." And the young man laughed, and he beat the old man some more. And suddenly the old man said, "Stop, I beg you." And he felt like he was at the end, almost ready to die. And the man said, "Why should I stop?" And he said, "Because I'm the man that saved you from a fiery death. I am your Savior. I'm the man that saved you years ago when you couldn't save yourself. I saved you from a fiery death." Can you imagine the shame and the degradation that he had sunk so low, that here was this Savior, here was the one who had saved him for the fiery furnace, and yet he was reaching out to disobey and destroy this man. And so it is with us. We have a God who has given us everything, given us life, given us health, given us everything, and yet we'll refuse to obey. Must I obey? Yes, because God has commanded. He's given us the commandments. You know, years ago, God told Moses in Exodus 20:2, and listen what he said to Moses, Exodus 20:2, your Savior. "I am the Lord thy God, which brought you out of the land of bondage, out of Egypt. I've saved you from the penalty of sin and death, from hell, which has enlarged itself to receive you. I brought you out of bondage. I saved you. You were oppressed. You were a slave in the land of Egypt, and I brought you out. You must obey my commandments. I gave my son, and he gave his life, that you might have a right to the tree of life. I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt have no other God before me." And the children of Israel gathered around when they heard God speaking to Moses and giving the commandments, and they heard the thunder roaring and the mountains trembling and the sound of a trumpet. And the people saw it, and they backed away. They removed themselves. They became afraid of this voice, and they said, "Let not God speak to us. Let Moses speak to us. Moses, you speak to us. We don't want to hear the voice of God, because all of the thunder and the lightning and the earthquake and the mountain move," and they were afraid. And so God spoke to Moses and told him to speak the law unto the children of Israel. And he said, "Moses, speak thou unto the children of Israel, and say to them, These are the commandments which the Lord thy God has given you, and ye shall obey them." No provision was made for a sacrifice. No provision was made for if you did not obey. Only judgment. Obey them or die. The wages of sin, and sin is transgression.